Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Transform Your Confidence podcast, a place where we bring you into our inner circle of recommended leaders, experts, and thought leaders to garner their insights on knowledge and techniques that are working today with the goal of leveling up your repertoire of expertise so that you're always set up to win. Before we begin, I want to remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Open Chairs Confidence Academy to view all video versions of our show. And search Transform Your Confidence wherever you receive your audio podcasts so that you never miss an episode when we launch them every second and fourth Thursday of the month. In today's show, I'm thrilled to bring to you the incredible success story of Sheila Whittakers, the first female CEO of a company listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, no less. We will learn what it was like navigating corporate Canada at a time when women were rarely seen in C-suite positions, let alone running companies listed on the stock exchange. Sheila will be sharing personal anecdotes to illustrate the evolution of feminism in corporate settings, as well as providing us with historical context on women's advancement in business and sharing some practical advice for today's female leaders navigating male-dominated spaces. It kind of feels like hardly nothing's changed, but I'm dying to know what the story was like back then. Sheila, I am thrilled to have you on this show. I am so looking forward to an incredible conversation to kind of lean into what you've learned about leadership through your unique experiential lens. Welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to try and share anything that I can that will be helpful to others.
Oh my gosh. So let's dive in then, Sheila. Let's begin by sharing a bit about the world as it was when you started your career and who you were at the beginning, stepping into corporate life in those times. Like, set that scene for us.
Well, who I was, and I feel to this day that it was a big advantage, was a girl from Edmonton who was here in the East with some requisite university degrees and an enthusiasm to try new things, which was important. And I must say now that I enjoyed every job I ever had. And that was one of the really positive things, was that after I got my first job after my MBA, which was being a combines investigation officer, after that, I really didn't look for a job again. The jobs looked for me. And that's a great experience and much, much less stressful.
You know, it's so interesting that you say that because, how many women today, Sheila, can even say that you were saying then? What do you attribute that to?
Well, probably partly focus. Like, I really liked the jobs I was doing and I did them with enthusiasm. And I think that, unbeknownst to you, it attracts a kind of attention. Mm-hmm. That when people are thinking, oh, I need somebody to do such and such, then they say, oh, well, she seems pretty interested in this. So I think that makes a difference.
It's so interesting that you say that, Sheila, because I absolutely agree with you. I know from my perspective, as an entrepreneur and the different people that I work with, I oftentimes hire people that may not be quite as skilled, but have massive passion, a massive kind of desire to learn, and massive belief in the company that I'm hiring them for. So do you think that may have factored into it, or do you feel that no, Raj, like I had the skills, I had the experience, and I had the passion and the foresight to understand that I deserve this job?
I think the way you described it was the first was more accurate.
Yeah.
I think that I remember for quite a while, and I mentioned this in the book, I was a consultant to the CBC. Mm-hmm. And it was a very, very, in every assignment was interesting. And after I'd been a consultant to the CBC for, I don't know, a few years, one day the senior vice president phones me and he says, Sheila, we're looking for a vice president planning and corporate affairs. And I was thinking I'd give you a call. And I said, oh, well, great. I will start writing a list of people I think, could be appropriate. And he said, no, Sheila, that's not what I meant. I meant you. And I said, oh, that's, I didn't expect it. And it was a wonderful job, of course. But it was in Ottawa and I was in Toronto. I said, that's the only big hurdle. But with the help of my family and the help of the corporation, we overcame that. And of course, it was a great job.
Absolutely. Sheila, I want to ask you this because I want to kind of set the scene a little bit for everyone watching, listening, and reading this. Can you share some highlights from your career and why they stand out for you as successes when you look back?
That's a toughie, but I'd say after my MBA, the first job, as I mentioned, was Combines Investigation Officer, which is antitrust investigation. And if you're at all like to investigate, or as my sister would say, if you're snoopy,
yes,
if you're snoopy, she says, perfect job for you, Sheila. You love looking in people's files and things. But anyway, so it was interesting. You felt like you were affecting the business structure of Canada. And then I had the opportunity while I was there to prosecute a case, first of all, with a famous lawyer whose name was J.J. Robinette, who in those days, was a name to conjure with. But also, it was the first ever predatory pricing case that Canada had pursued. And it's always interesting to be a first ever,
Yeah. Yes.
And so that was a highlight, and it was a highlight. We succeeded, and so it was the first successful predatory pricing case. So that was a highlight. And then I went from there to consulting, and it was a firm called the Canada Consulting Group, and they were designed on the style of McKinsey, but focused on Canada, which was really great because in those days, McKinsey wasn't interested in government work. And in Canada, if you're in consulting, if you're not interested in government work, you won't get that much work.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started, and we did a lot of very demanding. I mean, you don't take this kind of work if you aren't willing to work, 24-hour stretches. But it was very satisfying because, well, for example, I got to work on the Rogers bid for what we called then cellular telephone.
Yeah.
And, that's been a game changer.
Yeah.
And doing it was a game changer. And I was telling a colleague at lunchtime that while I was doing that job, I met with, I had a lot of pieces going on. And I met with, I decided I needed to make it real to those who were adjudicating because it was competitive. We needed TV ads and radio ads and print ads. So I met with the head of a firm like Vickers and Vincent. I forget who it was. It was lunch in the King Edward Hotel. And I told him, no, breakfast in the King Edward Hotel. I told him what I needed. And he said, oh, this is very interesting, and began to sort of think about logistics. And he said, and when you'd be needing that? And I said, tomorrow morning. Radio and television and print ads in English and French. And he said, oh. And then the waiter came to deliver the bill, and he pushed it over toward me, and he said, I think that's for you.
Oh my gosh.
They did it. They had this creative phone me in the middle of the night reading me radio scripts and they were funny and cute. I mean, people rose to the occasion, and I suppose that's an overall highlight, is when you're doing something exciting and important to the area you're working in, other people get excited and they like being involved, and it gives you a real feeling of accomplishment while you're working on it.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you. So at what point did you become the CEO of this company? And please share that, put you in another position of being first, like the first female CEO of a company on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Let's share that story and inspire everybody watching, listening, or reading this.
Well, it's interesting because it flows out of that task of winning the cellular license for Rogers. There were three major partners, and they offered resources, and one of them offered a finance guy from Quebec, and he was a senior financial officer of his company, and I liked him, and we worked hard together, and we pulled together a successful thing. And then the next job I went on to from consulting was at the CBC. Mm-hmm. And he came to visit me, but I had told the CBC I would only stay 2 years. He came to visit me near the end and says, well, what are you planning on doing, Sheila? And I says, well, I'm planning, I'm moving back to Toronto for one thing, but I'm planning on continuing consulting. And he said, oh. And then about a week later, he phoned me, and he had gone, well, it's a fellow called Pierre Morissette, who's a wonderful, wonderful guy. But at the time, he was president of CanCom. And he said, Sheila, will you come and work for me? And I said, well, what would I do? And he said, well, you'd be the chief financial officer. And I said, that's hardly my resume. And he said, I know, but you had an MBA and you majored in finance, and I know you could do it. And he said, I'm a CA, so I can support you, even though it's a public company, but we can cover it. And it's the job I have right now. And if you'll come and take it, then I'll give you something more senior shortly. Well, shortly, he confessed to me that he had this dream of running Metro Media. I think it's called Media. Anyway, and he was going to go do it, and the board was going to have a meeting in 3 weeks, and he was going to recommend to them that I take his position as chief executive officer.
Wow.
It was wonderful.
Absolutely. So knowing that, especially at that time, it's still the case today, but especially at that time, there weren't that many women in those types of positions. How did things pan out for you in terms of being a woman in such a high leadership position, especially since men needed to listen to you? I kind of want to gauge that.
Well, it's interesting because I've stayed friends with the fellow who was my corporate lawyer at EDS and my number 2 and my communications guy. We were talking the other day, and they brought up my leadership style. And I said, oh, I didn't really think about it. What did you think? And they said, you didn't try and lead like a man. You led like a woman. Mm-hmm. And they said it made it so authentic because you were leading like yourself. And because yourself was a person who'd say, all right, I need your opinions, and what should we do? And then they said, but then you would decide. Mm-hmm. You would be democratic, but you understood your responsibility to decide. And they said the person who succeeded you didn't know how to decide. So it was very flattering, mm-hmm. especially all these years later. But I think the essence of it is being yourself.
Mm-hmm. You've really brought up a very incredible and timeless perspective here, where trust is gained from being genuine. And that's really what happened here. Like, this wasn't a leadership style per se, but more so a DNA within you. Like, you knew that you needed to make a decision, but you wanted to make the right decision. And the right decision comes from discourse, comes from
Yes.
discussion, right?
Yes. 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 It comes from, well, we were talking today with some old business partners about genius and business genius. And I
Yeah.
said that the definition that I really liked was Einstein's definition, and it is to see what everyone else has seen and to think what no one else has thought.
Yes. That is a brilliant one. And
it's so powerful.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly what makes powerful leaders. So I want to ask you this, Sheila, because this is a great point for me to ask you this question. Can you share what the main challenge was that you had to overcome in order to claim the confidence? Because there's confidence, that's a big part of this as well. You needed to lean into where you know that you deserved this position. You knew that you deserved to be the person that made the final decision because you were in this position. You had to do that job. So
Yeah.
so you couldn't be feared. You couldn't create
No,
fear
I wasn't afraid
around
I was
it.
going to lose it. No.
Yeah. But even today, statistics show that so many women who are qualified to apply for positions don't because of a confidence gap and not a competence one. Your comments?
Well, I think one of the things is that I was never afraid to lead with my deficiencies. I was never afraid to say to someone who was trying to lure me into a job, okay, I like that. I think I can do this. I'm not very good at that. And I said, then I'd say I will work on it. For example, when I went to work for EDS, I didn't know how to use a computer. Now, EDS in Canada at that time had, between 4,000 and 6,000 people working on computers, and in the world, a lot more. And so when I was with the headhunter, I said, oh no, with the executive from the States, I said, it's a nice job, and you think you want me? And yes, I am a CEO on the stock, all that stuff, but I don't know how to use a computer. And they said, Sheila, we have 140,000 people who know how to use a computer. We have hardly anybody who's good at strategy. And so we're not hiring you. So, but the thing is that I was never afraid that somebody would whisper to somebody or somewhere that I didn't know how to use a computer. And I didn't bother learning for quite a long time because I had made full disclosure.
So do you think that's the key, Sheila? Because even today, with the stats being what it is, women genuinely don't think that they're qualified to apply for, a job unless they're 100% have all the check marks. Whereas men, comparatively speaking, if they've got around 60% of the check marks, they'll apply. What is that? What is that kind of gap in confidence? Can you help us break down what it is that women need to maybe step into to feel the confidence to do the thing that they know they deserve to do, but they don't do it because of lack thereof?
I think that's a very good question. And I think you're totally right that many women who are very confident, who are very well qualified, don't embrace don't feel confident. And I was glad. It's funny. I'm one of these people who hums things to herself. And one of the things that I hum is a song that goes, I have confidence in confidence alone. And as you can see, I have confidence in me.
Remind me where that's from again.
It is
oh my God.
Is it Mary Poppins? No, no, the one
Oh my God. I've seen this a million times, this movie as a kid.
Me too, and I love it. I think it must be Mary Poppins.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go like check that out, Google it. I need to know.
But it's and I I really like Julie Andrews, and I really liked her presentation. And
Hmm.
in a way, it might be in Sound of Music.
Sound of Music with Julie
Yes,
Andrews. Yeah.
with Julie Andrews, but she's also in Mary Poppins. But it might be in. It's probably in Sound of Music.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to go check that out.
and in a way, Sound of Music is a story of a sort of nun who's brought in to manage a large and complex family,
Yeah.
and she develops her own style. She doesn't parrot the style of the father with his whistle or anything.
Right. So when you hum this song, is this like an affirmation for you? Is this a reminder to you? Is that why you hum
Reminder.
it?
It's
Yeah.
a reminder. It's a reminder. Yeah.
So do you feel that women need that? Do you feel that women need to maybe do a bit more work around reminders as to why they're good enough, reminders as to, what are the things that are holding them back from being confident, and confidence is needing to action something, that they need to maybe do a little bit more work around that. And
Around affirmation. Yes.
yeah,
Around I can do this. You
yes.
know, I have done this. I can do this. Yes, because an awful. I don't know if it's our culture
Hmm.
or what, but I think we we aren't accustomed to the affirmation part as much.
Hmm.
And yet, when you listen to, say, great athletes, say a
Hmm.
woman who's running faster or higher or stronger, in her mind, she's saying, I can do this. I can do this.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So, in your experience, how is female leadership? We've touched upon it, but I feel like people need to hear it from your experience.
Mm-hmm.
How is female leadership different than male leadership? So we can put that on the table next.
You see, I don't think they are. I think we should think in terms of individual leadership.
Ah, I love that.
Individual. I am the kind of leader that I am. But my sadly departed husband, he was an outstanding leader, but he was very different than I was. But he was very different than other men, too.
So I love this. So what you're saying here, Sheila, is that don't get caught up in um identification. I'm woman of color, I'm woman from this part of the world, I'm woman. And just hone in on what are my attributes, what are my skill sets, what are my strengths, and just really hone in on who you are as an individual and take that into stepping into your life.
Exactly. Yes. I can do this.
Hmm.
I was talking at lunch also. It was a lunch with my bankers. It was really fun. But my granddaughter, who has just finished her second year in chemical engineering and is doing a co op right now, is doing a co op where they are. And I said, one of the things that I admire is she's this hardworking, focused, attractive, confident young lady. And she's just going at it.
Hmm.
And it's lovely to see. And I think we
Hmm.
are seeing more of that.
Absolutely. What would you say to women? And then I want to talk about your book because I feel it's a perfect segue. Um, what would you say to women who perceive certain aspects of their life to be negative for them to be able to move forward? And I'll give you an example. Like outside of being woman
Mm-hmm.
versus man,
Mm-hmm.
um, maybe a woman that isn't as highly educated as another woman, maybe a woman that comes from a certain cultural background that may not be as forthcoming with stepping into her strengths. right? There's certain cultural ethnicities. Maybe she doesn't have money or etiquette. These are all things that we look at in order to
Yes.
feel like they could potentially stop us or make us less than. So therefore, maybe we shouldn't. What are your
Yes, I think
thoughts?
you're right. I think you're right. And I think it is a role for systems to encourage, for education to encourage, for people to point out, look, Beth, you did that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge role for education and teachers.
Absolutely.
And
So
I was just going to say, most of them, like the ones that I meet or know, they're trying. They're trying to encourage everybody.
mhm. Absolutely. And I feel that, we are starting to turn corners because we are starting to have these conversations and we're starting to normalize these conversations that every attribute that we have, it's the perspective of how you look at it, right? Like,
Yes.
I am made up of all these things. Now, what are the advantages of all these things versus I'm made up of all these things and how are they holding me back? So, how do you flip the narrative to make sure that whatever makes you who you are, the reality of it is that that is who you are. Now, what am I going to do with it to make sure that my life moves forward in a positive manner? So again, we come back to affirmations, we come back to a mindset shift that's necessary. And I feel that confidence is a big part of that journey for anyone, especially with women. Any
Yes.
examples you can share there? Like, have you seen that as a leader yourself in the workforce with women that have worked in the company? Does anything stand out?
Well, I think that giving people an opportunity, first of all, in, say, a group situation, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to contribute is a big deal.
Yes.
And then validating what those people say or do or think is important.
Yes.
I also think that there are always sort of sub jobs that people can help us with, and selecting people who seem to have a skill but not the confidence to help you with a sub job where you're still you don't have to be nervous. It's going to turn out you'll still have control if they can't do it. But giving them the chance to perform is a big deal.
Yes. You're absolutely right. Giving them the opportunity
Yes.
to do the thing that, and I feel that this also comes from having just that extra insight as a leader. And what actually makes a good leader is seeing things in people you work with that maybe they don't see, and understanding where that opportunity can be supported also, I feel makes for a very strong and powerful leader. Your thoughts?
Well, I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think short term, long term, I think short term, if you can put someone in either a short term course or an opportunity with a customer or something where they'll gain, even if they're valuable and you'll miss them, it's foolish not to do that because overall you win.
Mm-hmm.
You even win if they decide they like the company that you've put them into because you've got a supporter for life for your company because you've
Absolutely.
helped them along. And that makes a big difference too.
It absolutely does. I agree. So great segue, Sheila, for us to talk about your newest book. You've written several books
Yes, I
from
have.
from
Yes.
your experiences. The latest one is called Through the Glass Ceiling: Reflections on Feminism from the C-Suite. I've got to say, what a fabulously provocative title. And before we dive in, let's just tell people immediately, where can they go grab this book and any of your past books? Let's just put that on the table before we move and dive into the book.
Well, there is a site that my son, who is an AI specialist, created for me. That's just SheelahWhittaker.com.
SheelahWhittaker.com. Perfect. It's your
And
name.
your podcast will be on this site. And a portal to order the book is on the site. Reviews, at least good ones, are on the site.
I love your honesty.
So that's easy. Otherwise, Indigo, places like that, carry it.
Perfect.
So
and folks, if you take a look at the bottom, you can see how Sheila spells her name. It is the Irish spelling of Sheila. So make sure that you get that right when you go to SheelahWhittaker.com. Okay. Now I'm dying to ask you, I want to know what the book's about. But before you break it down, let's get one thing clear in everyone's heads, because the title prompted me to ask you this before we start talking about the book. According to you, Sheila, what is feminism?
I've thought a lot about this, not surprisingly, over the years. And what I've come to is that feminism is the desire to establish equality.
And what is equality?
Equality means, well, there used to be this song that was a children's song, free to be you and me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that, mummies are people with children, and daddies are people with children. And it's about recognizing that we're all people with capabilities. They're not identical, but the outcome can be a sense of my aggregate of abilities properly honed is as good as your aggregate of capabilities. And we have to find and help each other find the way to use those capabilities, and not to minimize or contain somebody's capabilities because, say, they're a woman or whatever, but to help everybody maximize their capabilities. And I know that one of the things that I get teased about, because by my kids especially, because I'm often quoted as saying this, is that I think we'll have true equality when we have as many incapable women in positions of seniority as we have incapable men.
I love that. Oh my God, that's so true. You should put that up on your website if you haven't already done that, Sheila.
Because the point is, all the women don't have to be amazing. All the men aren't amazing.
Yeah. I love it. I think that's fantastic. So let's crack open the book.
Yes.
Let's share with everyone what the book's actually about. Like, what is it about and who is it for?
Well, what it's about is that through my career, which now at this point has been fairly long, I experienced wonderful help, terrible events, fascinating events. And there used to be a book called Pilgrim's Progress, where the pilgrim was making his way along. And I remember, the main thing I remember is he fell into the Slough of Despond. And I can imagine falling into the Slough of Despond. So it's about me personally making my progress through life as a complete person, which is a feminist, but is a mother, is a writer, is a strategist, is a good friend, all those things. And what kind of spurred it was that I had quite a serious operation. And so I had a really nice PSW, a wonderful Jamaican woman called Trudy Ann. And I would tell her, stories about stuff because I was lying horizontal. And she says, these stories are good. You have to write them. And she went out and bought a scribbler
Oh
She
my
brought a
gosh.
scribbler and she brought it back to me. And she says, here, you write down those stories. Now, I didn't particularly, but I thought about what she was saying. And then when the publisher of this book, the publisher of Sutherland House, came along, he said, Sheila, I'd like you to write a book. What could you write a book about? I said, oh, well, Trudy Ann said I should write a book about breaking the glass ceiling. And he said, yes, that's what I want you to write a book about.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things we speak about breaking the glass ceiling as aspirational, you don't very often hear what happened next.
Mm-hmm.
Was the woman so proud of herself that she floated away on a tide of, euphoria? Did her children revile her because she wasn't there for their school play?
Mm-hmm.
So the point was in Through the Glass Ceiling was getting through and then having the chance to look down and around. Or at one point I said it's turning the glass ceiling from a ceiling to an observation deck.
Mm.
So you can see what the opportunities are, what people are trying to achieve, but also the whole shape of it, the whole shape of human interaction, including families and including workforces and the like.
So in a nutshell, Sheila,
Mm-hmm.
what can someone expect to get from this book?
Well, at maybe this a fairly simple level, tips.
Okay.
Tips. For
Yeah.
example, expect to be disliked sometimes.
Absolutely.
Or if a decision seems impossibly hard to make, don't make it. Don't force it. Don't make that kind of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
at a simple level, kind of as you go through, there's ways of confronting things that are hard to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
There are also, what I decided that would be really useful was to embrace other, what do we call them, demographics. So, for example, my sister, who was hugely influential to me, she's part of what they call the silent generation. She was born in 1938, before the war. And then my dad went to war in 40, and she didn't see him again until 45. So that's, and plus, when she went to university, she ultimately became a lawyer. But when she first went to university, there were no women registered in law,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I had her write a part for me. I have a best friend in my building here who's 97, and she got her PhD in 1948.
Wow.
She's part of what they call the greatest generation.
Yes.
So I had her write a piece for me on how it was to do that. My daughter, who will be turning 50 in 4 days, and I better not forget, she's part of, let me see, how does it go? Gen X. She's a Gen X.
Yeah.
And I had her write a piece on what it's like to be a Gen X and a bit about what it's like to have a feminist mother, a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, the end of the book is I have a granddaughter who lives in New York, who is 17. And I had her write about what's pretty stale, old hat stuff. Feminism is yesterday, but what matters to her today.
Right.
So I wanted a set of perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
and how people dealt with them and how they felt about how they dealt with them. So that's an important part of the book.
Absolutely. So what do you hope when you put this together?
Mm-hmm.
What do you hope optimally the reader's going to get out of this book?
first of all, probably, I hadn't thought of this before, but probably I want them to think it doesn't have to be so blasted serious. It can be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Look at her. She did some pretty stupid things along the way, but she had fun.
Mm-hmm. But she also did some fabulous things.
Yes, I did some fabulous things. And so a sort of a general feeling that it's not all sacrifice. It's not all, oh my God, I hate leaving my 2 kids at home with the nanny while I go out and work. Instead, it was being realistic about myself. I realized that when I first hired a nanny, I think I was earning $14,300 a year. I thought if I had to pay all $14,300 to the nanny, that was fine, because I wasn't doing it. I was doing it because I was better out there doing my kind of work, and she was better doing her kind of work, and we were both happy.
Yeah,
and it was good for the GDP too.
Yeah, of course, always a win-win-win all around,
Win-win,
which is
yeah.
perfect. So Sheila, I want to ask you this. One more question around the book. Who is the book for? It sounds obvious, but I want you to state it.
The book is, well, it's funny. If you'd asked me what the target market was, I would have said sort of 30-year-olds, male and female, who are trying to sort out how, not millennials, kind of.
Okay.
That's who I thought.
But
well, I presented it to my bridge club, who are more like, we're the silent generation, and they read it and they loved it. They loved it. It was as if they were able to put their life in perspective and think about what they'd done.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't judgy. It isn't a judgmental book. It isn't, you should have done this,
Yeah. It's presenting perspectives that are varied for you to see what actually shows up for you in that book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that. So I want to, around this, I want to loop back to a few things that I feel is going to be very valuable for everyone. And one of those things is, how can women move the needle in leadership success today? So let's bring it back here. Because between the confidence gap that we talked about earlier and the perceived rarity of positions for women at the top, there's a perception, but there's also a reality, and that's not the question. There truly still are so few women who are at the top as compared to men.
I think that I'll give you an example. When I was working in Britain, Britain was kind of behind Canada in feminism, so that was interesting to me. But one of the things, they were getting the government was getting all rah and everything. And they decided that there weren't enough women on boards and that there should be a target of 30% of women on boards. And my first reaction was, why 30? Why, if you're aspiring toward an egalitarian situation, would you not say 50? So why give away some of your leverage up front? I mean, maybe you'll only get to 30 and they'll think, wow, we almost made it 50. You know what I mean? But don't compromise before you even start. So one of the things, by the way, the males that have read this book, my brother was important. He's retired now, but he's a professor of mechanical engineering. He just loved it. Like, men love this book.
Why do you think that is? Is it an insight into the female mind across many perspectives? Because that's the reason. right? Because that's the reason why men like to read women's magazines. Like, you know, how they used to say that men love reading Cosmopolitan. So do you think it's a similar kind of scenario?
I think it's a similar kind of scenario. It gives them ideas as to how to make things work, but it's also it's funny.
Okay. And men love humor. Yeah.
Yes, men love humor. I make fun of myself. I make fun of others too, but I make fun of myself. It's not preachy. And it's unisex in its aspirations.
I love that. I love that. Oh, guys, so you need to go get this book, right? SheelahWhittaker.com.
Yeah.
Go grab this book. Sheila, do you have your other books also on SheelahWhittaker.com?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So that's all you need to remember, guys. Just go hop on over there. I think that this book definitely sounds very intriguing to me. How did you come up with such a cool title? Because the title alone makes me want to read it.
That's a good question. I make scriggly little notes, and I came across a piece of paper just a couple of days ago that had a whole bunch of title ideas on it. It was kind of like brainstorming. And I just looked at it and I thought, yes, it's through the glass ceiling, you know. It's not, you know, climb. When I first started thinking about it, I was thinking about the ladder and climbing the ladder and all. And then I thought about, I don't know if you can see her, but there's a lady on the ladder.
Yeah, I can see her. I've been looking at her.
She's one of my very favorite sculptures, and she's sitting at the top of the ladder, looking weary, which I think is a good message too.
Yeah, it is. Because you can get to the top of the ladder, but you sure you want to be there when you get there, because it can be quite lonely, right?
Well, or tiring.
Yeah, a combination of both.
Yes.
Sheila, this kind of brings me to another thing, because you as a woman that has had this really interesting and unique career. You've also a wife. You've also been a mother. Like, all of these roles, when you look at women in your position who have gotten up that far up the ladder, the woman that's sitting at the top there, and you have all of these other roles as well. How do you navigate it all? Because that's the other thing that I feel is very challenging for women, is that they feel they need to choose, and they feel guilt. And these are things that men don't feel. So can we? Yeah.
Yes. One of my phrases that I use sometimes is ditch the guilt, ditch the guilt. But what I would say is, I am a triumph of delegation. I know how to delegate, from making dinner, to taking the kids to school. I did the things I was the best at, and I let my kid's father or the nanny do their part, or I let them figure out their own way. My son Nicholas, who's my youngest child, writes in the book that one of the things I asked him to write down for me, what did I teach you? And one of the things that he wrote down was, she taught me net present value. And I thought, well, not everybody would have that kind of answer, but he found it very useful.
I find that so fascinating. Even more reasons to read the book, guys. Oh my gosh, absolutely. Do you have a copy of it that you can show the cover? There it is, guys. Through the Glass Ceiling: Reflections on Feminism from the C-Suite by Sheila Whittaker. Oh my God. I need to get a copy of this now, Sheila. I'm so intrigued to want to read it.
Oh, good.
Absolutely. So let me ask you something here that I think is really important. Typically, women go through kind of three main phases of work, right? One is kind of the pre-baby career of a woman. Then there's the coming back from having babies, whether it is maternity leave or whether you've been, a stay-at-home mom, right? And then there's the retirement chapter where we don't ever really retire, or do we? So I want to ask you this. What advice would you give to women in each of these three phases so that they could live their optimal life from what you have experienced?
The advice I would give is to think how they personally want to handle the situation, not the prescription, not someone else's notion of, not your mother-in-law's notion that you're supposed to stay at home with the baby or something, or not someone else's eyebrows raised over some role. But I would say to try and think through these various roles and to modify them to meet your own needs. One of the things I think I mentioned in the book that when I was studying for my MBA, I found myself pregnant. And it turned out that the baby was going to be born between my final exam and graduation, which was
Of course.
Of course it was. Of course she was. So I thought, oh, well, okay. So initially, when professors sort of noticed that I was getting a little large, I mean, they just kind of had to take it in their stride. I wasn't apologizing. And actually, the baby's father was also taking the same degree as I was. So the two of us were there going through it. And I remember in the finance final, we had a desk in front of us. It wasn't, and the baby was 8 3/4 months. And she kicked the final off the table. Well, everybody around was, oh, and I said, so, okay, I just have one more question to go. And I went and got it and answered the last question. But that was because I had decided personally that I was comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have complications or anything. If I'd had complications, then I would have decided personally what was the best way to do that.
Mm-hmm. I understand. So really the big takeaway here, Sheila, is stay in your lane of what your experiences are, what your resources are, what your aspirations are, what your specific circumstances are, and do the decision that makes most sense and by blocking out what other people's perceived perspectives would be on the decisions you make in your life.
Yes. Yes, that's very apt, because in this particular case, I was taking social issues and marketing when I was probably 7 months pregnant. And I had a really nice professor, and he laughed and said to me, someone asked me if I had any women in my marketing class, and I said, yes, I have a woman, and she's pregnant. Now, some years later, he told me the same story. He forgot he told it. But this time he said, yes, I have a woman. I had a woman back then, and she was pregnant and she was unmarried. And I thought, that's interesting. You edited it the first time. I thought that was good.
Yeah.
Because he'd grown comfortable over the years with the circumstance.
Yeah. I love that. And so, so let's talk a little bit about men before we close off then, Sheila. We've talked a lot about, what women need to do to navigate a successful career of their making. That's the important part. Can we also look at what men can do to ally this, to create support and equity to their female team members? Because we talk a lot about women, but there's also that other side that needs to create space for that to be possible as well. So we're not always pushing and shoving against a wall. And I say equity rather than equality, because I don't believe that men and women, just as you mentioned earlier, need to bring the same things to the table, but rather I believe that what both bring to the table needs to be valued equally. So
yes, I totally agree. I
absolutely.
totally agree. And it actually, there is a reaction right now. There's an anti-feminism reaction, but in fact, feminism is liberating for men.
Mm-hmm.
Because it gives them the opportunity to put forward what they want. To say, okay, I actually have always wanted to try writing. And if you want to have a baby and go back to work, maybe I'll stay at home and write and watch the baby or whatever.
Yeah.
Or it puts a layer of realism into your situation. Like, I married my husband when I was, let me see now, he was 50 and I was 41. And I realized that I couldn't have married him earlier because he was very driven in his career.
Mm-hmm.
And he wouldn't have had the time to pay the attention to me that I needed.
Right.
Whereas meeting him in later life, when I was starting to peak, he was very happy. He says, I've been successful. I don't need to worry about it. I will focus on helping you. And every couple has to have a different, every couple has a different solution.
Mm-hmm.
But it's liberating if both of you have a set of aspirations that you can kind of talk about and support and say, oh, well, okay, maybe we can't do that this year. Maybe we'll do it that year, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So based off of that,
Mm-hmm.
advice for men in the workplace and at home. On two fronts, because that's too general a question. On two fronts. One is to support their lady. And the other is to do what they truly want to do and not feel like they have to be the breadwinner if
Yes.
that's not what they want to do. Like it's complicated for men as well.
Well, exactly. It is complicated for men. I totally agree. And the part that isn't emphasized enough is that it is liberating for men too, or it can be if they want it to be. In a way, back to free to be you and me, the point is that there are men who are stuck in jobs because they think they need either the status or the money or to do that job, and they don't like it. And they should be allowed to say, look, I'm not comfortable in this, and to do something else.
And this is where women need to give grace and space.
Yes, grace and space, and take on responsibility. Yeah. I mean, some of it is sharing. Sometimes for a while, like I made a move that I wouldn't necessarily have made, but it was better for the kid's father. But that seemed fair because he'd done things for me,
Yeah, yeah. So for us to wrap all of this up in a beautiful red bow.
Yes, pink
bow. It's funny because in my mind I thought pink, but I said red. So you must have heard me.
I did hear you. Yeah.
You heard me. Is there anything, Sheila, that we haven't talked about, whether it be the book, whether it be women in leadership, whether it be how to navigate today's world so that you can make the most out of your life? Can you share what maybe we haven't yet shared?
Well, as you were speaking, I was running my mind over, say, my sister, who became a lawyer when she was 38. That was what she had wanted to do. She, unfortunately, I think, now that she's much farther on, is disappointed that she couldn't have done that sooner.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the people find their calling later.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking if we could encourage people to recognize that it is worthwhile to try and find your calling earlier, and also to maybe show it up, maybe, take some courses, or because whatever, improve your qualifications or get help or whatever, that then the males could be happier because they could actually feel more personal freedom.
Okay. Yeah.
And the women could be happier because they could feel more in control of their own life.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting, because it's like men had all the pressure over here, traditionally speaking, women had it over here. Men want less of it, right? Like
Yes,
they shouldn't feel like they need to, it all needs to be on their shoulders.
exactly.
And then the women shouldn't feel that all they're worthy of is one element when they also want to move into this arena. So it's just like this thing that's going on that we should allow to go on.
And that they shouldn't feel that all they're good for is a circumscribed role,
Right.
that they're good for more than that. And that the
And
men should similarly feel that they should have more opportunity to realize themselves. Some of the self-actualization movement, which was very big when I was studying for one of my degrees, it really had some of the right ideas, you
mm-hmm,
know?
mm-hmm. I agree with you completely, because it shouldn't be gender-based. Like
No,
self-actualization has nothing to do with gender.
exactly.
It's the constructs that we've created in our lives that create the segmentizations that we've created, whatever they are in this world. And there are many.
Yes. And if we focus more on self-actualization, I think we wouldn't get so bound up in LGBT, LMNOP, because self-actualization would embrace that
All of it.
as normal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that
Ooh.
would be nice.
Well, there's a podcast topic worth talking about, right, Sheila?
Yes, that's for sure.
We'll have to have you
Anyway,
back on, won't we?
well,
So, any
it's been a
final
real
words?
pleasure.
You too, my lovely lady. Any final words that you want to leave people with? Any words of wisdom? Any looking back on your life and seeing kind of how things are today? Any final words of wisdom that you'd like to leave people with? Because people always generally live their lives moving this way until they're in a position and they have the fortune to look back to be able to look this way.
I think that it's all bound up in what we were talking about, self-actualization and everything. I think that people should take the opportunity to be free to be themselves.
And whatever it takes to get there, that we should feel supported as well in all of the
Yes, and
mechanisms.
and we
Yes.
should be supporting. Well, while
Yes.
we're trying to be ourselves, we should help others too.
Absolutely. What a great way to end this conversation, Sheila. If anybody wants to hang out with you, where should we send them? Like LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a good start.
Perfect. And don't forget, folks, you got to go over to SheelahWhittaker.com and go grab that book that we've been talking about. And also take a look at the other books as well, because I'm sure that once you get a hold of one of them, that you're definitely going to want to see a lot of the other things that Sheila
Yes,
imparts on the world as well. Right,
yes,
Sheila?
because I'm not a one topic person. For example, my first book was about a murder of a toddler in 1885.
Oh my gosh. I'm telling you, you are such an interesting lady,
Oh,
Sheila.
thank
Like,
you.
so diverse and so, like many layers to who you are. And I've loved this conversation with you. I want to thank you for being on the show. And I know that, people are going to glean so much wisdom from this and are going to be intrigued to want to read the book.
Thank you very much. And let me know how you like it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, folks, that was the fabulous Sheila. If you, would like to learn more about her and also pick up the book, let me remind you again, the book is called Through the Glass Ceiling: Reflections on Feminism from the C-Suite. It's the last in a series of several books that have been written by Sheila. You can go grab them at SheelahWhittaker.com. And I will see you next time with another insightful episode of the Transform Your Confidence podcast, which, if you enjoyed today, go give it a 5-star rating now before you forget, and tell everyone you know to come hang out with us here. Go check
I
out all
certainly
of,
will. That's the other thing we should say is don't
yes.
be afraid to congratulate yourself.
Oh
If
my
somebody
gosh.
asks you to grade yourself, say, well, I think I was an A.
Yes. And that's exactly what I'm saying. 5-star rating. We want nothing
Yes.
less than that, right, Sheila?
Yes, exactly. Thank
Thank you.
you. Bye.
Thank you, Sheila. And guys, just stay connected with us on our socials at the Open Chest Confidence Academy and join our free weekly newsletter at the openchestconfidenceacademy.com. Take care of yourselves. Go hang out with Sheila and hit the notification button so that you never miss another episode of our podcast, and go check out all the over 100 podcast episodes we already have. And I will see you next time.